My name is Arthur Vance. For 40 years, I was an architect in Port Blossom, a city that rises from the coast like a testament to human endeavor, all glass and steel kissed by the salt-laced wind. I didn't design the skyscrapers that pierced the clouds, but the homes nestled in the hills, places where families were meant to grow, where light and space were choreographed to foster peace. My wife, Eleanor, used to say I didn't build houses, I built sanctuaries. She was the poet to my pragmatist, the heart that gave my designs their soul. We built our own sanctuary 30 years ago, a small cabin tucked away in the Blue Ridge foothills, overlooking the quiet expanse of Serenity Lake. It wasn't grand, just a sturdy embrace of cedar and stone, with a wide porch where the scent of pine needles mingled with the damp earth. Every beam, every floorboard, held a memory of our life together. It was there we watched our daughter, Clara, learn to skip stones across the water. It was there we decided to grow old, listening to the call of the loons as twilight painted the lake in hues of lavender and rose. Since Eleanor passed 3 years ago, the cabin has become more than a retreat. It's a connection. The quiet there is different from the silence of my large, empty house in the city. At the lake, the quiet is alive, filled with the rustle of leaves and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. It's filled with her. I can almost hear her laughter in the breeze, feel her hand in mine as I walk the familiar path to the water's edge. Driving the 2 hours from Port Blossom, leaving the city's relentless hum behind, is a pilgrimage I make often, a journey back to the heart of what matters. This past Friday, I'd packed my weekend bag with a sense of quiet anticipation. The week had been long, filled with the tedious minutiae of managing the properties I'd invested in over a lifetime of careful work. All I wanted were 3 days of peace, a few good books, and the familiar comfort of the cabin. As my car crunched down the gravel driveway, a knot of unease tightened in my chest. A sleek, unfamiliar sedan was parked where my old station wagon should have been. On the porch, 2 figures stood silhouetted against the afternoon sun. I recognized the graceful curve of my daughter's frame instantly. Clara. Beside her, shifting with an awkwardness that had become his signature, was her husband, Liam. They were wearing my thick, white bathrobes, the ones Eleanor and I had bought on an anniversary trip years ago. Steam curled from coffee mugs held in their hands. What on earth? I murmured, my hand still on the car door handle. My weekend bag felt suddenly heavy. Clara turned, and the expression on her face was one I'd never seen before. It wasn't the petulance of her teenage years or the strained politeness of our recent interactions. It was a look of cold, hard dismissal, as if I were an unwelcome stranger who had wandered onto her property. "Dad, you can't be here," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the tranquil air. "Liam and I are having a romantic weekend." I blinked, processing the sheer absurdity of her words. This was my cabin. The deed, the tax records, the very wood of the walls bore my name, my effort, my history. "Clara, this is my cabin," I began, my voice trailing off as I realized how foolish it sounded to have to state the obvious. "I don't care," she said, setting her mug down on the railing with a sharp clink. "We got here first. We're not leaving." Liam mumbled something I couldn't hear, his gaze fixed on the distant water. Clara waved a dismissive hand at him. Her robe gaped open, and she pulled it shut with an irritated tug. "Honey, I drove for 2 hours," I said, taking a step toward the front door, my legs feeling strangely weak. "I was just looking forward to a quiet weekend." "Well, you can turn around and drive back. You're just in the way." "In the way." The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. In the way, on the porch of the home I built with my own hands, the sanctuary where I came to feel close to the memory of my wife. I stood there, rooted to the gravel driveway, my bag at my feet, staring at my only child as she glared at me from the porch of my own home. Liam, a man whose wedding I had financed and whose student loans I had paid off, looked everywhere but at me, a flush of red creeping up his neck. Clara, my Clara. The little girl who'd fallen asleep in my lap listening to stories of brave knights and clever queens, the young woman who had clung to me at her mother's funeral, her sobs racking her small frame. Eleanor's voice, a gentle echo in the chambers of my memory, whispered, "Be patient with her, Arthur. She's still hurting. Give her time." 3 years. I had given her 3 years of boundless patience, of understanding every mood, of accommodating every request, of answering every call for financial help. And it had led to this. Being told I was in the way at the one place on earth I felt I truly belonged. "Fine," I heard myself say, the word tasting like ash. "I'll go." I bent to retrieve my bag, my knees protesting the movement. I was 65 years old, and my own daughter was treating me like an inconvenience, a piece of old furniture to be moved aside. "Good," Clara called out, her voice softening now that she had won. "Call before you come next time. Call before you come to your own home." I walked back to my car, each step a retreat from a battle I hadn't known I was supposed to be fighting. The engine turned over with a quiet, reliable hum. German engineering, I thought with a flicker of bitter irony. Dependable. Unlike family. In the rearview mirror, I saw them settle back into the porch chairs, already resuming their weekend, my brief and inconvenient appearance forgotten. Clara raised her mug in a gesture that might have been a toast or a final, dismissive wave. The road back to Port Blossom stretched before me, long and empty. I was driving home in defeat, just as Eleanor had always worried I might, just as I always seemed to do where Clara was concerned. But something was different this time. The sting of humiliation was slowly, surely, beginning to curdle into something else. Something harder. The weekend crawled by in a haze of solitude and troubled reflection. My house in Port Blossom, usually a place of quiet order, felt cavernous and cold. I replayed the scene at the cabin over and over, Clara's words echoing in the silence. "You're in the way." Each time, a fresh wave of hurt washed over me, but beneath it, a current of anger was beginning to stir. On Monday evening, the phone rang, its shrill summons cutting through the gloom of my study. It was Clara. Her voice was devoid of any warmth, any trace of apology. It was crisp, efficient, the tone of a CEO announcing a corporate restructuring. "Dad, I need you to listen carefully. Liam and I have been talking, and we've made a decision." A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. "A decision about what, Clara?" "The cabin," she said. "It's going to belong to Liam's parents now. To Helen and George." My hand, holding a lukewarm cup of tea, froze halfway to my lips. "What?" "Clara, what are you talking about?" "It's their home now," she stated, her words dropping like stones into the placid pool of my shock. "You're not to go there anymore." The leather of my armchair creaked as I sat bolt upright. "Clara, have you lost your mind? You can't just give away my property." "Actually, I can." "And I am," she said, her voice sharpening. "You barely use it, and they need a proper home. They've been struggling." A montage of images flashed through my mind, 30 years of 12-hour days, poring over blueprints, managing difficult contractors, every sacrifice Eleanor and I had made to afford that land, to build that sanctuary. "It's my cabin, Clara," I said, the words bursting out of me with a force that surprised even myself. "I spent my life earning that place." Her laugh was a brittle, ugly sound. "Don't be so dramatic. You're being selfish. After everything we've done for you since Mom died." Something inside me, a cord of patience that had been stretched thin for 3 long years, finally snapped. "Everything you've done for me?" My voice rose, a tremor of disbelief running through it. "I paid for your master's degree. I paid for your wedding. I bought you that car. I gave you the down payment for your apartment." "That's what fathers are supposed to do," she retorted, her tone icy. "Besides, you're old. You're alone. What do you need with a big cabin anyway?" Old and alone. The phrase landed like a punch to the gut, but instead of making me crumple, it solidified something in my core. Eleanor's gentle voice about patience faded, replaced by a colder, more pragmatic clarity. Eleanor had never heard our daughter speak with such calculated cruelty. "They are Liam's parents, Clara. They are strangers to me. They're family now," she shot back. "And unlike you, they'll actually appreciate it." My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles were white. "No." The word was quiet, but it landed in the space between us with the weight of a dropped anchor. A stunned silence crackled over the line. "What did you just say?" I said, "No, Clara. The answer is no." You can't say no to me, she sputtered, her composure finally cracking. That cabin is wasted on you. Liam's parents have been living in a tiny apartment, and you're just hoarding property you barely visit. The irony was a bitter pill. I'd been visiting more than ever since Eleanor's death, seeking solace in the one place we'd been happiest. Clara knew that. They can find their own housing solutions, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. I can't believe how selfish you've become. Her voice climbed, nearing hysteria. Mom would be so ashamed of you. That was the line. The one she should never have crossed. Eleanor, the soul of generosity, would have been horrified by this theft, this blatant manipulation of a grieving husband's love for his only child. Your mother, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, would be horrified by what you've become. Her sharp intake of breath was audible. How dare you? I hung up. For the first time in 3 years, I ended a call with my daughter. The phone lay silent in my hand, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. Outside, the evening traffic of Port Blossom hummed its familiar tune, but inside my study, a seismic shift had occurred. The phone rang again almost instantly. Clara. I powered it off. Sleep was a distant country that night. I sat in my armchair until the early hours of the morning, the silence of the study no longer feeling empty, but charged. By the time the first gray light of dawn filtered through the window, I was no longer Arthur Vance, the grieving, accommodating father. I was Arthur Vance, the architect, the builder. And I was about to design a new structure, a boundary made of steel. The next few days passed in a blur of focused activity. The fog of grief and passive acceptance that had clouded my judgment for 3 years began to lift, replaced by the crisp, invigorating clarity of purpose. I spent Tuesday morning in my study, not mourning, but researching. I dug out the original deeds to the cabin, the blueprints, the property tax records. I reviewed North Carolina property law, refreshing my memory on statutes of ownership, transfer requirements, and legal protections, information I had once known as a builder but never imagined I would need to deploy against my own child. My phone buzzed intermittently with texts from Clara. Dad, we need to talk about what you said. Don't be so stubborn about this. And then, the one that solidified my resolve, Liam's parents are driving up to see the cabin this Sunday. The moving truck is booked for the following week. She wasn't asking. She was informing me of a decision already made, a reality she expected me to accept. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I deleted each message without responding. On Wednesday, I drove downtown to the offices of Chin and Associates. Marcus Chin had been my attorney for 20 years, a sharp, impeccably dressed man whose calm demeanor masked a mind like a steel trap. His office overlooked the harbor, the water glittering under the morning sun. Arthur, he said, rising from his desk to shake my hand. It's good to see you, though you look like you're carrying the weight of the world. What can I do for you? I settled into the familiar leather chair. I need to discuss property protection strategies, Marcus. He raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Commercial or residential? Residential. The cabin at Serenity Lake. I paused, choosing my words with the precision of an architect specifying materials. An interested party is attempting to assert ownership rights they do not possess. Marcus's expression grew serious. A family member? The question was a quiet diagnosis of a sickness I hadn't wanted to name. Yes. He nodded slowly. That complicates matters. These disputes can become emotionally fraught. I'm beyond emotion, Marcus. I need to know my options. Several, he said, pulling out a legal pad. First, we ensure your title is unassailable. Second, we can establish further layers of protection. A living trust, perhaps an LLC. It makes any unauthorized transfer impossible. How quickly can this be done? A few weeks for a trust to be fully established. I thought of Clara's text. The moving truck is booked for next week. I may not have that long. Marcus set down his pen, his gaze sharpening. Arthur, is someone trying to physically force you off your property? The question hung in the air. When I simply met his gaze and nodded, his professional demeanor hardened into something more akin to personal resolve. Then we act now. I'll draft a cease and desist letter and a notice of no trespass. We'll have it served. In the meantime, document everything. Every call, every text, every threat. A contemporaneous record is your strongest weapon. Threats. Coercion. The legal terms for what my daughter was doing. As I left his office, my phone rang. It was Clara. This time I answered. Finally, she said, her voice sharp with impatience. Are you ready to stop this childishness and be reasonable? The only childishness, Clara, I said calmly, is your apparent belief that you can steal my home. Steal? How dare you use that word? What would you call it when you take something that doesn't belong to you without permission? A beat of silence. Then her tone shifted, becoming wheedling, manipulative. Dad, Liam's parents really are in a bad spot. George's pension was cut, and Helen lost her part-time job. This would be such a blessing for them. It was a tactic I recognized from her teenage years, when demands failed, appeal to pity. That is unfortunate, I said, my voice even. But their financial situation does not grant them a claim to my property. You could be generous. You could show some family spirit. Like the family spirit you showed me last Friday at the cabin? Another pause, longer this time. That was a misunderstanding. We were just surprised to see you. At my own home. Which you felt I should have called before visiting. The circular logic was maddening. Clara, the conversation is over. You are not getting the cabin. That's final. Fine. The word was a whip crack. But Liam's parents are still driving up this Sunday. They've already made their travel arrangements. The line went dead. I stood beside my car, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. Sunday. She had given me a deadline. In my years of building, I learned that the person who reveals their timeline first often loses the negotiation. She thought she was cornering me. In reality, she had just given me the one thing I needed most, a fixed point to build my strategy around. Sunday was 4 days away. It was more than enough time. That evening, a quiet fury propelled me. I made dinner, but barely tasted it. I sat in my study, surrounded by the blueprints and awards that represented a life of methodical creation, and I realized I had been treating my relationship with Clara like a crumbling structure I was afraid to touch for fear it would collapse entirely. I'd been patching cracks with money and placation, ignoring the rot in the foundation. The pattern was so clear in retrospect. Her requests had grown steadily bolder over the past 3 years. The help with her tuition. The down payment on the apartment she and Liam couldn't afford. The new car when their old one was unreliable. Each time, I had written a check, telling myself I was being a supportive father, easing her path. I saw now that I hadn't been supporting her, I had been training her. I had taught her that I was not a person with feelings and rights, but a resource to be tapped, an ATM whose only function was to dispense funds and property upon request. Eleanor's words about patience had been for a daughter grieving her mother, not for a calculating woman exploiting her father's love. Eleanor, who had been my partner in every sense, would never have stood for this. She would have seen the disrespect for what it was and addressed it head-on, with love, yes, but also with unshakable firmness. What would you have me do, Eleanor? I asked the silver-framed photo on my desk. And for the first time, the answer that came back wasn't a memory of her voice, but the echo of my own rediscovered strength. Stop being a victim, Arthur. Start being an architect. An idea began to form, not a plan of anger, but of elegant, inescapable logic. A design. It wasn't enough to simply bar them from the property. They needed to understand, on a visceral level, the consequence of seeing me as an obstacle to be removed. They saw the cabin as a mere asset, a thing to be acquired. I would make the house itself an active participant in their education. My mind, so long dormant in personal matters, clicked into its old, familiar gear. I began to sketch, not with a pencil, but with a strategy. Components. Resources. Timeline. Desired outcome. The key resource was not my lawyer or my money. It was Elias. My neighbor, a brilliant, perpetually caffeinated software engineer in his late 20s who worked for some cutting-edge tech firm. I had helped him last winter when a burst pipe flooded his basement, and he'd been looking for a way to repay the favor ever since. On Thursday morning, I walked over to his house, a cup of coffee in hand. He answered the door, looking, as always, as if he had just stepped out of a wind tunnel filled with data. Arthur, everything okay? Elias, I said with a small smile. I have a creative project for you. A home automation challenge. His eyes lit up behind his glasses. You have my undivided attention. 2 hours later, we were driving towards Serenity Lake, the back of his SUV filled with a startling array of technology: motion sensors, wireless speakers, programmable LED light strips, smart water valves, and a master control tablet. So let me get this straight, Elias said, navigating the winding mountain road with expert precision. You want to create an immersive user experience for some uninvited guests. That's an excellent way to put it, I said. A responsive environment that actively discourages their presence using coordinated light, sound, and water systems? Precisely. Elias grinned, a look of pure, unadulterated joy on his face. Arthur, this is the most beautifully passive-aggressive engineering project I have ever heard of. It's a masterpiece of psychological architecture. When do we start? We spent the next 2 days transforming my peaceful cabin into a technological work of art. Elias was a maestro, orchestrating a symphony of smart devices. We placed motion sensors in every room, hidden in plain sight. We installed tiny, powerful speakers behind vents and in ceiling corners. We rigged the plumbing with smart valves that could be controlled remotely. The key is escalation, Elias explained, tapping away at the control tablet. Phase 1. The entry trigger. The moment they walk in, the lights flicker and a calm, synthesized voice says, "This is a private residence. Your presence is not authorized." And if they stay? I asked. Phase 2. Continued motion triggers the next level. All the lights begin to strobe in unsettling, random patterns. The voice becomes firmer. Warning. You are trespassing. Leave the premises immediately. And for a little extra spice, he added with a gleam in his eye, every faucet and shower in the house turns on full blast. By Friday evening, the system was complete. It was elegant, comprehensive, and utterly deniable. Anyone investigating would find a state-of-the-art, if eccentric, smart home system. It was all controlled from an app on my phone, complete with live feeds from discreetly placed cameras. As we packed up, Elias paused. You know, Arthur, a simple, no trespassing sign would be easier. I tried that, I said. It didn't work. I then put up a new, professionally printed sign on the front door. It read, "Welcome to the home of the future. System testing in progress. Enter at your own risk." It was my final, perfect piece of plausible deniability. Sunday arrived, clear and bright. From my study in Port Blossom, I watched on my laptop as a minivan pulled into the cabin's driveway just after 2 p.m. Clara, Liam, and his parents, Helen and George, emerged. They moved with an air of entitlement, unloading bags as if they were arriving at a prepaid resort. They gathered at the front door and paused, noticing my sign. I watched Helen, a woman with a sour, pinched face, read it aloud. System testing in progress. Enter at your own risk. What is this nonsense? She scoffed. Oh, that's just Dad being weird, Clara said with a dismissive laugh. He probably thinks it's some kind of joke. Ignore it. Liam, ever the follower, shrugged and pulled a key from his pocket, a copy, no doubt, of the one I had trusted his wife with. They stepped inside. Make yourselves at home. Clara's voice rang out, clear through the audio feed. This place is all yours now. I watched them move through the living room, Helen already pointing out where her furniture would go. They were so confident, so certain of their victory. I let them settle in for a few minutes. I let them open the refrigerator and inspect the bedrooms. I let them believe they had won. Then, with a deep, steadying breath, I opened the app on my phone and tapped the button labeled Initiate Welcome Protocol. The effect was instantaneous. On my screen, I saw the lights in the cabin begin to flicker. The calm, synthesized voice of the system filled the space. This is a private residence. Your presence is not authorized. Clara froze, a look of confusion on her face. What was that? Liam laughed nervously. Must be part of Dad's weird new system. They kept moving, their continued presence triggering the next phase. Suddenly, every light in the house began to strobe erratically, disorienting flashes of red, blue, and white. The voice returned, louder and more severe. Warning. You are trespassing. Leave the premises immediately. Simultaneously, the sound of rushing water erupted from the kitchen and both bathrooms. Helen screamed. George stumbled backward, his face a mask of shock. What is happening? Liam yelled over the din, Clara, do something. But Clara was standing stock-still in the middle of the living room, her face pale, turning in a slow circle as if she couldn't comprehend the sensory assault. The more they panicked and moved, the more the house responded. The strobing intensified. The warnings grew more insistent. It was a perfectly calibrated nightmare. I watched them run from room to room, trying to find a source, a switch, a breaker, anything to make it stop. But there was nothing. The house itself seemed to have turned against them. After 10 minutes of relentless, escalating chaos, they scrambled for the door. They burst out onto the porch, blinking in the peaceful afternoon sun, looking back at the cabin as if it were a malevolent entity. They piled into their minivan and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Inside the cabin, the lights returned to normal. The water shut off. The voice fell silent. All was quiet at Serenity Lake. I closed my laptop, a profound sense of calm settling over me. It wasn't the triumphant thrill of revenge. It was the quiet satisfaction of a well-executed design. The call came an hour later. Clara's voice was a ragged shriek of fury and fear. What did you do? What in God's name did you do to that house? I feigned gentle confusion. Clara? What's wrong? I thought you were at the cabin. The place is haunted. Or booby-trapped. Lights, alarms, water everywhere. It was terrifying. My goodness, I said, letting a note of concern enter my voice. That sounds awful. It must be a malfunction with that new smart home system I had installed. I'll have to get the technician to look at it. Did you see the warning sign I put up? There was a choked sound on the other end of the line. This wasn't a malfunction, and you know it. This was you. Clara, how could I possibly do something like that from 200 miles away? I'm an architect, not a magician. You're sounding hysterical. We're never going back there, she sobbed, the fight draining out of her. Never. You can keep your cursed cabin. I think that's a wise decision, I said softly. Some places, like some people, have boundaries. It's best to respect them. I hung up before she could respond. The war for the cabin was over. But the campaign for my own self-respect was just entering its final, decisive phase. The next day, I called Marcus Chin. Marcus, I said, I'd like to move forward with that living trust. But I've had a change of heart about the beneficiary. 2 days later, Clara and Liam appeared on my doorstep in Port Blossom. Their faces were grim. The fear had been replaced by a hardened resolve. We're not leaving until you sign the transfer papers, Liam announced, attempting to block my doorway. There are no papers to sign, I said, stepping aside to let them in. I led them to my study and gestured for them to sit. On my desk was a single, sealed envelope. What is this? Clara asked, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. A solution, I said. You wanted the cabin to go to people who truly needed a home. I found I agreed with you. She snatched the envelope and tore it open. Inside was a letter from Marcus Chen's office and a copy of a newly filed deed. She read it, her face slowly draining of all color. Her hands began to tremble. You gave it away, she whispered, the words barely audible. To the Blue Ridge Housing Initiative? A charity for homeless families. I did, I confirmed. The transfer is legal, complete, and irrevocable. They provide shelter for people with nowhere else to go. People who are genuinely struggling, Clara. Not people who simply want a free lake house. Liam stared at me, his jaw slack. But it's gone? Forever? The foundation now owns it, I explained calmly. As part of the donation, I have retained lifetime usage rights. So I can still visit. But upon my death, it will be used to house a family in need. It will be a true sanctuary, just as Eleanor always wanted. Clara sank into a chair, the documents fluttering from her grasp. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not anger or entitlement, but a flicker of dawning, horrified understanding. She had overplayed her hand so spectacularly that she had lost the game entirely. All you had to do, I said, my voice quiet but firm, was respect me. All you had to do was treat me like your father, not your bank. But you couldn't. So now, the cabin belongs to people who will be truly grateful. And you are left with exactly what you have earned. They left without another word. The confident, demanding couple who had arrived were replaced by two people hollowed out by the consequences of their own greed. The following weekend, I drove back to Serenity Lake. The air was clean, the water was calm, and the cabin stood strong and peaceful among the pines. I sat on the porch, a cup of tea warming my hands, and watched the sunset. There was no victory, only a quiet, profound peace. I had lost a daughter, perhaps for good, but I had reclaimed myself. I had honored Eleanor's memory not with passive patience, but with active strength. And I had ensured that the sanctuary we built would live on, a legacy of true generosity, a testament to the enduring strength of a well-drawn boundary.